We're going to get into something that I've been wanting to do since we started the podcast. I just never thought that it'd be so easy to figure it out. I'll be real. I wanted to get my hands on the Overstreet Price Guide 1. Now, the reason why I thought that this could be easily done at first was because, hey, they exist, right? Like, this is an Overstreet. And if you look at like past Overstreets, yes, they are collected, but not that collected. I mean, they make a new one every single week. And please, just enlighten the community. What is an Overstreet Price Guide? You're an Overstreet Price Guide advisor, so is Russ Bright.
I am. So Bob Overstreet, who created the Overstreet Price Guide, started, I believe, in 1971, was the first time we had a price guide. Not the first time we ever had a price guide. We actually had a price guide in 1965 for the very first one. But 5-6 years later, something that was more mass published and put a stamp on the industry is pricing for comics. So since then, every year, we've had a guide that tells us the value, allegedly, of every comic book that's pretty much most comic books that have been published.
Yeah, the most that they could put together and categorize. It's very difficult to do. And really, up until Key Collector, there was no type of organization of valuable comic books outside of this particular book. And on the com floor growing up, even till like the last 5 years, man, into this day, really, when you go to a convention, this is the Bible of the comic dealers. I'll be hitting the floor, and it will be without fail every convention that there's a point where somebody in our circle, a friend, a seller, a buyer, well, they'll stop and go, I need an Overstreet. And they're looking around and they're asking me, they're asking you, yo, where's your Overstreet? And you go, oh, dude, I lent my Overstreet to Gus. Shout out Gus. Oh, I lent it to Mike. Oh, shout out Mike. And we're hunting. Where'd the Overstreet go? Everyone's got an Overstreet. You need it. You need it. And you guys provide insight as advisors, you and Russ, every single year. Same with John Delamayan, the drummer of System of a Down, owner of Torpedo Comics. He does the same thing. There's like a handful of very well-known dealers in the community. We just happen to have 2 of them on the show. Shout out. So I hit the subscribe button, who provide every year just a little bit of an analysis to push the community forward, to provide some insight on what they experienced that year. And the Overstreet Price Guide is something that I buy every single year. Even if I don't use it that much in the year, it feels wrong to not own the latest one.
It's a fantastic source for articles. I mean, you have other Overstreet advisors there. I mean, there's a lot of us. We all write articles, and we all have our experiences. We all have our history through the year, which is far greater than most. So it is a wealth of information just for that alone. Now, you might think, oh, they're not up to date on pricing. They're off on this, they're off on that, but that's not what you necessarily use it for. It gives you some sort of baseline for the non-key issues of books.
You need that index, man. It's very important.
Yeah, it gives you something black and white to look at. And then it also tells you the amount of issues in the run and just a lot of the start dates.
Significance of books.
Yeah, so it is still very useful. I mean, do I wish there was more digital format? Sure, but if I'm in a con floor, I don't even get reception in the first place because Wi-Fi is awful.
Every single time.
Every single time.
To just buy a damn comic book using a credit card, hoping that they can connect their damn phone, you're waiting 10 minutes.
Exactly. So the price guide still has use. As much as it gets poo-pooed, I get it. And you can't keep up-to-date information published once a year.
Comic fam, I wanted to talk about the first Overstreet Price Guide. And when I looked up how much the first edition went for, these things exceed $4,000. These things are expensive. And it's interesting because like as the years go on, they get cheaper and cheaper. But there are people who look at the price guides themselves that come out every single year and the ones from the past with value. And they're a collectible. And as you go, back in time looking for these price guides, they are actually pretty pricey. Like you get kind of surprised, like, damn, this is like the price of a damn comic book.
So $4K for what, a first edition?
Oh, dude, I pulled that out of my ass, dude. I don't have the Overstreet Price Guide first edition number off the cuff, but it's expensive, man. A first edition it's got to be over $40.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. And it's funny you mentioned that. And we could talk about it later. Actually, we'll get into it, but the actual second and third printings have variations that are more expensive than the first.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I don't know, man. Comic fam, I want to hear your thoughts about this next section in the comment section because we're going to get into the first Overstreet price guide. I have a second print in my hand right now. It's a hardcover. I paid $25 for it. It literally says 25 on the cover by Robert M. Overstreet. And it's glorious. We had some fun moments just chilling, looking at this book just in my place over the last couple days as we were researching and figuring out what we're going to talk about on the mic today about this. And we're going to get into pricing. Of course, stay tuned, hit the subscribe button. But there's a lot of other history within this book that we have to talk about prior, because I'm convinced that in 1971, this was a little controversial. I'm reading Robert M. Overstreet's foreword in this book. Shout out Butch, the comic gato. He's just chilling on the floor, looking at me like, just rub my stomach, please. The little saber tooth demands attention. This book has insight from 1971 about the industry that is so fascinating. And considering this, it really wasn't until this point that we had in writing prices for comic books at a mass scale. We'll talk about the first one here in a second, and we'll get into that. But we also have a glimpse of the past that gives an eerie similarity. Like, it really is very similar to the comic market today. We have Robert essentially convincing dealers, because that's really who would be using this, that this was not only a necessity, but he was being conservative and delicate because he knew that back then, this may or may not be received well.
I can see, I mean, if you think about it being a collector, or just like, the collecting is new. The very first price guide, like I said, was in 1965.
There wasn't even a grading scale really at this point.
Yeah, and that was put out by some bookstore out in LA, Argosy.
Let's talk about that. Okay, well, let's back it up. Comic fam, if you are interested in us discussing more about Overstreet and price guides and the history, let us know in the comment section below. We're going to give you a taste, though, because there is more to this story that we can go back even further, because Overstreet 1 started in 1971. That's literally what it says here. And it encompasses dates of comics that were released between 1933 to, at the time present, 1971. But let's tell them about the first price guide that debuted in LA.
So the one in 65, the Argosy.
Yes.
So this was named after the bookstore in LA area called the Argosy. And it was put, they obviously, there was no grading. Really, everything was considered mint.
They just were like, hey, let's throw out everything that isn't just pristine.
Yeah, they graded 5,000 comics, they only had 5,000 comics in it. And Butch is going to give his 2 cents here. I'm going to put you down, big guy. And mint was everything. And at the time, there was no grading. So mint could have just meant nice condition looking book.
You're probably thinking like fine, very fine. Yeah. Collectible worthy.
Exactly. So we wouldn't really see actual grading and pricing to that level until 6 years later with the Overstreet guide. And I'd like to get into Argosy more at some point.
It's a fascinating thing, but fewer than 50 copies exist of this.
Yeah, exactly.
This is like a pamphlet, like at a bookstore. How cool is that?
It is. And we'll actually get to see trends because Marvel just really started to hit its stride. So you're going to see books that came out at cover price only a year later
selling for more.
Seeing for far more multiples because it's hot.
Yeah, and I love that aspect of this. People are going to go just off the cuff go, oh, yeah, they're going to be super cheap. No, it's more than that. You're actually seeing, you're going to be surprised because we're going to get into some of these prices here. And I was shocked. Aside from like, obviously, yeah, they're really affordable. And we're going to talk about Action 1 and what that went for. But comics were hot back in the 70s, man. Comics were hot in the 60s. The quote from Robert M. Overstreet is this: the comic book market from the early to the late 1960s was very unstable. Prices were increasing so rapidly in all categories during that period that the debut of the price guide was impractical. He didn't feel like it was even worthy of making a price guide till 1971 because prices were doing this. They were all over the place. Comic fam, on the audio versions, I'm moving my arms like I'm an octopus. That's how it was like.
That's a wonderful octopus, Tom.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I get what you're saying. Like, if it's like we know how we're dealing with it right now. Can you imagine them not putting out a price guide because they just don't feel it's worth the effort and time because prices keep changing.
Right. It's off the chain. And what's also very intriguing is that we have in the very first page, like there's an acknowledgement section and there is a credit section, but the real first page, it says page 2. The title is Condition of Comic Books. And that's where I want to start this analysis today. I want to talk about his attempt, Robert M. Overstreet, to make sense of values of comic books based off of condition, because we know how important that is to us. But it was a bit different back in 1971, specifically because there is a 6-tier system that he created, that he popularized. The first starting with mint. And we're going to go down this list together, Jeff, and I want to hear your thoughts as we go through, because we can kind of like feel out similarities comparing to the price guide that we have today to the grading scale we have today. We're going to start with mint. M. Perfect. Absolutely like new, regardless of age. No printing or cutting defects. No creases in the cover. Slight discoloration from age only. You can, a mint copy, if you have a little discoloration, it's okay. No big deal. Arrival dates penciled on covers do not detract from this condition. What do you think about this?
I agree for the most part.
Right?
I mean, that sounds minty to me.
Mint fresh.
It's your boy Jim Mint.
Just like that.
Exactly.
I mean, the only thing that's a little bit weird is the discoloration, but that's such a loose term. You know, you hear these things, discoloration. What does that imply?
Especially considering that this is under like 20 years, essentially, that most of these books that they're talking about, especially the ones that they cared about back then, that those pages are pretty damn fresh as it is. Like, we're looking at books from this Promise collection that look pretty damn minty. And back then, yeah, a little slight discoloration, no big deal. Next on the list, do we have very fine? Do we have near mint minus? No, we do not. We have fine condition, FN. Slight wear or discoloration on edges only. Otherwise, perfect. Read once or twice and stored away. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds more like very fine plus.
Right? Probably like a, solid like 8.5 plus, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, fine. I mean, we all know what fine is. Fine is a 6.0, guys. If you don't know, fine is a 6.0. So
yeah, 6.0 has got some problems. You got some chipping happening. You got some spine ticks.
You got color breaks. I mean,
yeah, man.
It's not as pretty as that sounds.
Oh, was that a sticker on there? It looks like there was a sticker on there at some point. Someone removed it. But no. Fine back in 1971 was just like, it's near perfect. It's not mint, but it's damn nice. But here we go. This is where it gets kind of fun here, because the rest of these grades, because, as you go lower grade, there's more problems. So you have more things to, kind of pick at. Very good. All right. And what is very good right now?
4.0.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what very good is back then. A tight cover. That's a quote. When was the last time you had someone tell you, oh man, this cover, that's a tight cover if I've ever seen one.
Yeah. Like a toy guy.
It's tight.
No, man.
I want to hear that more, comic fam. You got to be telling people on Instagram, like, when they show off their ultimate Fallout 4s, oh, man, that cover is tight.
I've only heard tight for a cover for A, it's a cool cover.
I'm imagining like the Staples, right?
Or it's tight to the Staples.
Yeah, that cover is tight, especially considering a lot of Golden Age comics had just one staple.
That's true. That's 100% true.
Some signs of wear, minor markings, but none that deface the cover. That makes it sound like markings on the inside were a little bit more forgivable. Some discoloration, but not soiled. Here's my favorite part for a very good comic book. Slight professionally applied magic tape repairs on spine only. What does that mean in 1971? Professionally applied magic tape repairs on spine only.
Who was the comic professional back in 1971 applying tape? So
I gotta know.
Yeah.
They still may exist right now. 71 is not that long ago. If you know that, if you're a member of the community that was doing some professionally applied taping back in the day, I want to hear in the comment section below.
So this is up to the tape. It sounds like a fine.
Right.
To today's standards, like a 6.0, maybe even a little bit better. Okay, but the tape, that sends it to a whole nother realm.
Right?
So I don't know. That's a weird one. The tape was okay at the time.
All right. Well, now we have a good grade. And we're only halfway through this list, and now we're at good. All right. Already. We have an average used copy complete with both covers and no panels missing. Slightly soiled or marked, possibly creased or slightly damaged on the edges, but no tears requiring tape repairs. So like you can't be adding pieces with tape in this one, except on the spine, which may be taped. They just didn't mind tape back then, man. It makes sense because even really in the last 20 years, people's thoughts about tape, even the grading companies to a degree, have changed their minds.
Yeah, not even 20 years. I would say the tape thought process has changed in like 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
You used to be able to tape a spine split and get a better grade than leaving it there. So that's just interesting. That's completely changed. Now they just grade it like it's not there and then give you a tape note. So it seems like there's a history there.
I feel like there's like an aspect of, who was handling most of these comic books. We're talking about dealers, right? They had a ton.
Yeah, he started this tape thing then. I mean, you got to think about this is the baseline that we all went from.
They probably had a bunch of dealers who were like dealing with their comic books and they're like, this cover is about to fall off. Let me just put some tape on there. They're professionals, right?
Yeah, it says it's okay.
It should be fine.
Right? And I'm making the book look better by putting tape. So great.
Why not? All right, now we have fair condition. We're in the last two. Complete except possibly both covers requiring or having tape repairs or tears. Damaged by all elements. All right, this is where it's like, you got some problems here. But fairly sound and completely legible. You need to be able to read it without trying. That right there is also known as a presentable comic book. One that has eye appeal. Eye appeal right here is what's going to keep it from fair below, or rather above, the bottom grade.
I think a lot of these grades are just a little bit lower than what we're used to. So good is more like a VG plus,
Right?
Or very good, fine, or very good, right? Yeah, VG. Yeah, good is like a VG plus, and then
Like a fine is like a VF.
yeah. So it's just interesting, just kind of associating that to what today's scale is like, to what everyone else was judging their books by.
But pretty damn close, right? Like considering how long ago this was and how there was no baseline measurement until this point, really? I think it's pretty damn respectable, especially when you read what a poor condition is. I'm going to be real, comic fam. This is pretty damn harsh. Poor is the lowest grading tier on this list here. And it says damaged, heavily weathered, soiled, or otherwise unsuited for collection purposes. Let me say that again. Otherwise unsuited for collection purposes. This isn't even worth you collecting. It's so poor.
That's just like,
That's harsh, dude.
it is harsh because, throwing books away at all in like this day and age, it just seems blasphemous. So at the time, I guess because it's not far removed from the birth of it, really, to be like, okay, this is so abundant when it's really not that abundant. I think a lot of people at this time didn't quite realize
How much loss there was, right?
well, what's truly out there in comics. They don't know every book out there yet at that time. So they're still learning themselves. So, I think for this to come out of nowhere or come from nothing and all of a sudden the scale be created, I think it's a great start. That was fantastic. The tape for me, maybe because I'm growing up in a generation where tape is not okay. But, at that time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I would probably have adopted and been like, okay, great. That's just what it is. So again, Bob Overstreet, thank you for putting out a guide. Great job developing something to start with. What are we, 50 years later?
Absolutely. Now, we also have an important added note at the bottom of this page that I'm looking at that I wanted to read to the community. It literally says important and it's underlined. Books with defects such as pages missing, torn or taped covers and pages, brown or brittle pages, restapled, heavily taped spines or covers, watermarked, printing defects. I love this one right here, printing defects. Remember that in a second. Stained, hold, or other imperfections that distract from the original beauty. are worthless than if free of these defects. They're worthless. And I have to point out, printing defects now, Spawn, Malibu Sun, Error Print, anybody? Okay? Some of these books, the Witches variant where the number is misprinted, some of these books go for so much money because there were errors at the printing press. Back in 71, worthless.
Double covers.
Worthless.
Printing error. I knew a gentleman, well, I didn't know, but I heard of a gentleman who used to get double covers and he would rip off the cover.
Oh my goodness.
Because he didn't like the double cover and thought it was a defect. He would rip off one of the covers. So it's just, it's interesting, right? Like, you know, if you had a miscut, worthless. It could be anything. Centerfold. Maybe this staple didn't attach to the centerfold properly. I mean, just, it's, oh man, that's interesting to just hear worthless on these things.
How much time has changed. We're going to, before we get into pricing, stay tuned. We have a fun list that we have to go through with the community here. I wanted to just showcase one last thing about the book itself before we get into the heart of it. The back page, the back cover rather. Let me read this to you. We're going to have a picture of it for our comic fam. It's an ad by Robert Bell, a gentleman who was working hard in New York. He was a inventor. He was a thinker. He was someone who had foresight. He was someone who respected the collectible. Robert Bell created one of the most used things in the comic book history, in the industry that we use today.
Yep, he created his Bell bags. The good old, very first comic bag.
That's right. And this is what this ad says on the back. Marvel comic bags. Larger bags for Golden Age comics are also available at the same price. Over 100,000 comics in stock. Send in for a free list. He had indexed his comic books. He knew what he had. Shout out Robert Bell. He also is happy to send a sample plastic bag just to introduce it to you, because a lot of people didn't care about bags back then, but he wanted you to get a taste of it because he knew once you wanted one, you're going to want more. Also, these were specially made for Marvel Comics because at this time, Marvel was blowing up so much that it was bolded in the advertisement that he wanted you to know, yo, these bags are perfect for your Marvel comic books. In 1971, Spider-Man was barely around at this point.
If you think about it too, I mean, just so you guys understand how people bought comics, because he had a catalog. A lot of people sold via mail through catalogs. They would advertise in certain spaces, okay, where they thought comic enthusiasts would read, and they would put their lists out for you to order from or contact them for a list. So it's by mail. I mean, we all get books by mail now, but we at least get to see images, descriptions. We have recourse via PayPal or whatever.
No, this is like a mail away, man. Like back in the day when you were little and you're like trying to get that cereal box prize, you had to like, you know, put stuff in an envelope and just ship it out. You know, you're getting advertised without pictures. You're filling out your subscription for your whatever it was. You know, the book fair at school, and you're writing out, yeah, I want A1 and A5, and you barely can see the picture in the magazine. It was even worse than that back in the day. They're literally just getting lines. Amazing Fantasy 15. Amazing Spider-Man 50. Sure, I want that. And we're going to tell you what they went for back in the day. But I'm not done with this ad because it gets even freaking better. Protect your comic collection with these bags. Doesn't get more direct than that. For only $3 per 100, or $1.50 for 50 bags. And you have to add 50 cents for postage and handling on orders under $5. Send your order to Robert Bell, Box 18, New York, 11787. But this is the quote I wanted to make sure the comic book fam just like memorized. That they know. This is an important quote, man. This is a marketing ad that means something to me. It meant something to you. When you saw this, I saw a grin on your face that it's like you just saw your grading results came back at 9.8. You smirked side to side. That grin was real. If it's worth collecting,
it's worth bagging.
Oh, it makes me smile right now just saying it. If it's worth collecting, it's worth bagging Robert Bell, you were right. And to this day, in 2021, it's never been more true.